Welcome to my podcast.
What if I told you that in English, a word like education is treated as this sort of formless floating mist?
Right.
But in Spanish, it's a fenced-in, tangible object, something you can practically draw a boundary around.
Yeah, that's such a great way to put it.
Usually when you set out to learn any language or even just brush up on one for a trip, your brain immediately focuses on the big, flashy things.
The vocabulary.
Exactly. The towering mountains of vocabulary that take months to memorize, or the complex verb conjugations that just make you want to throw your textbook out the window.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh.
Or those rolling rhythmic sounds you just can't seem to get your tongue to do right.
Right. We spend all our energy there, and we tend to completely ignore the invisible words, the tiny microscopic connective tissue that actually holds the whole architecture together.
Words so incredibly common, so omnipresent that they just fade into the background noise. You stop seeing them altogether.
Exactly. I'm talking about words like the or a. For us English speakers, the is basically the air we breathe. It's one single word. It never changes shape. It asks absolutely nothing of us mentally.
It is completely invisible.
But today, we are welcoming you to a deep dive where that invisibility vanishes. We are exploring a single, highly focused source, which is the Definitive Guide to Spanish Articles.
And it is a fascinating document.
It really is. And let me tell you, what we found in these pages is that in Spanish, these tiny words are actually the ultimate secret to sounding fluent. They operate under a completely different, almost philosophical set of rules.
They really do. And the deeper you get into the source material, the more you realize that mastering these articles isn't just about, expanding your vocabulary list or passing a grammar test.
Right.
It's really about changing how your brain maps the physical and conceptual world. You have to start seeing boundaries, categories, and abstract concepts in a way that English simply doesn't require you to do.
It forces a totally new perspective. Right. Okay, let's unpack this, because today is all about understanding the why behind Spanish grammar, rather than just rotely memorizing a textbook.
Yeah, nobody wants a grammar lecture.
Exactly. So let's start with the physical mechanics of the linguistic superglue, as I like to call it.
I like that.
In English, we have our definite article, the. I kind of think of it as a giant one-size-fits-all t-shirt. It doesn't matter if you are talking about a singular dog, a plural group of dogs, a masculine concept, a feminine concept. You just slap the on it and you're out the door.
But Spanish hands you a custom-tailored suit.
Yes.
A very precise four-way tailored suit, to follow your analogy. It demands that you measure the noun first.
Right, you get this rigid 2x2 grid. Before you even speak, you have to match the gender of the noun, so masculine or feminine, and the number, whether it's singular or plural.
Exactly. So the book, which the text identifies as masculine, is el libro, using the masculine singular. El, the table, is la mesa, using the feminine singular, la. And then for plurals, you have los libros for the books and las mesas for the tables.
It forces you, as the speaker, to instantly categorize every single thing in the universe before you even finish the first syllable of the noun.
It's a lot of mental processing up front.
It is. But here's where I want to push back a little, or at least ask a question that really bugged me when I first started reading through the source material.
Okay, lay it on me.
If the article always reliably precedes the noun and its adjectives, like the text's example of el coche rojo for the red car, why does Spanish force us to do these mandatory word merges?
I know exactly what you're talking about, the contraction.
Yes, the al and the del. If the four-way grid is so perfectly mathematical, why are we suddenly smashing separate words together?
It's a great question, and it speaks directly to the rhythm and momentum of the language. When the preposition a, which translates to, or the preposition de, which translates to from or of,
Right.
When they meet that specific masculine singular article, el, the rules dictate that they absolutely must fuse into one word.
So they literally just combine.
Yes. So the word a plus el becomes al. The source gives the example, voy al supermercado, which means I'm going to the supermarket.
Oh, got it.
And the word denel, el, becomes del, like in the phrase el perro del vecino, meaning the neighbor's dog. And I cannot emphasize this enough to you listening. This is not an optional stylistic choice.
So it's not like slang.
No, it's not a casual spoken slang thing like saying gonna instead of going to in English. It is a strict, non-negotiable architectural rule of the language.
But I notice it's only for the masculine singular.
Right, exactly. It only happens with L. It does not happen with the feminine la or the plurals los or las.
So you don't smash those together?
No, you still distinctly say voy a la playa for I'm going to the beach, keeping the word separate. Or hablo de los libros for I'm talking about the books. It's just L that gets absorbed.
It's almost like linguistic gravity. That specific word, el, just gets pulled into the orbit of the preposition.
That's a great way to visualize it.
But, okay, if we are talking about strict, non-negotiable rules, the source pointed out this fascinating rule breaker that I absolutely loved.
Oh, the phonetic exception.
Yeah, cacophonia. It turns out Spanish actually cares so much about how things sound to the human ear that it will gladly break its own rigid gender rules just to avoid an ugly sound.
What's fascinating here is how Spanish prioritizes auditory flow over rigid grammatical mapping in very specific instances. You're talking about singular feminine nouns that happen to start with a stressed A sound.
Right, or an ha sound, since the H is silent in Spanish.
Exactly.
So let's take the word for water, which is agua. The text notes it's a feminine word. By the strict mathematical rules of our custom-tailored suit, we should use the feminine article. It should be la agua.
But try saying that out loud. If you say la agua, you get this double A sound right in the middle. La agua.
Yeah, it feels weird.
It creates a pause, a sort of phonetic hiccup in the throat. Spanish fundamentally hates that lack of flow. To avoid that unpleasant double A collision, the cacophonia Spanish simply swaps in the masculine article el.
So you just say el agua.
Exactly.
Even though the noun is still secretly feminine, that's the part that blew my mind. The noun is essentially wearing a disguise.
It really is.
The source gives this amazing example that perfectly illustrates this. The phrase el agua fria, meaning the cold water. You have el, the masculine article, then agua, the noun, and then fria, the feminine adjective.
It's a gender-mismatched grammatical sandwich.
It is.
But that mismatched sandwich proves that the swap to L is purely cosmetic. It's strictly an auditory disguise for the sake of the ear.
Because the adjective still knows it's feminine.
Right. The noun's core identity remains stubbornly feminine, which is why the adjective fria still has to match that feminine identity. Another great example from the source is the word for eagle, aguila.
Which also starts with that stressed A.
Exactly. So you don't say la aguila, you say el agua.
But the moment you make it plural, something magical happens.
Oh, it really does. The moment it becomes plural, the auditory problem completely disappears.
Because of the S.
Yes, the S in the plural feminine article, las, creates a natural spoken buffer. So it safely reverts to its normal feminine state, las aguilas.
Las anguilas.
Right. The double A collision is gone, separated by the S, so the grammar can comfortably go back to its default setting.
That is just so incredibly cool. It's like the language has a built-in shock absorber for its own pronunciation.
That's exactly what it is.
So while the physical mechanics of these words change for sound and gender, which is a tricky enough mental workout for an English speaker, the real mind bender is when Spanish decides to use these words compared to English.
Definitely.
The physical forms are just the vehicle, but the philosophy of the is the actual destination.
Precisely. Let's look at what the source calls the values of the definite article.
Now, reading through the text, there are some straightforward ones. The source uses these heavy linguistic terms, anaphoric and deictic.
Which sound a bit intimidating.
Honestly, they sound to me like terrible rare diseases, but they are actually pretty simple concepts, right?
They are. The source uses those formal terms, but anaphoric is really just recalling a subject you've already brought up.
Could give me an example.
The text uses this one. Vi un gato y un perro. El gato era negro. Which translates to, I saw a cat and a dog. The cat was black.
Oh, so you use because we already established which specific cat we are talking about in the previous sentence.
Exactly. And tectic simply refers to physical space.
Yeah.
Pointing at something.
So like saying that thing over there.
Right. Like the phrase, pasme el plato. Pass me the plate. Meaning the specific plate right there on the table. In these highly specific physical cases, English and Spanish hold hands. They agree entirely on when to use the.
But here's where it gets really interesting. What the source calls the generic value.
Yes, this is a big one.
This represents a major philosophical shift between the two languages. In English, if I want to talk about a broad concept or a whole class of things, I drop the article entirely. I just say, education is important.
Right.
Or, I like cats. I would never say the education is important or I like the cats. But Spanish fiercely demands the article.
It does.
You are required to say, la educación es importante. And me gustan los gatos. Why? I remember trying to learn this and my brain was screaming, why can't I just say education?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals how Spanish fundamentally treats abstract concepts and entire classes of things.
Okay.
Let's go back to your intro hook. In English, when we drop the article, we are treating the concept of education like an infinite formless mist. It's just this vague, boundless idea floating in the ether.
Yeah, that's exactly how it feels.
But Spanish looks at that exact same abstract concept and says, no, this is a whole tangible entity. It is the entire bounded universe of education. It puts a fence around it. And because it is now a defined whole entity, it requires a formal introduction via the definite article.
It makes it monumental. It's not just education, it is the education. It's the entire concept wrapped up in a neat little package with a bow on top.
Precisely. You are referring to the generic totality of the thing.
Yeah.
When the source translates "me gustan los gatos," you are essentially saying, I like the entirety of the species known as cats.
So you aren't pointing at specific cats sitting in your living room.
No, you are pointing at the overarching concept of cats.
That makes so much sense when you frame it like that. It literally frames reality differently.
It really does.
But if the generic value makes abstract things feel tangible, the next value we found in the source, inalienable possession, makes the highly tangible feel, well, almost communal, or at least far less strictly owned.
Yeah.
This blew my mind. We're talking about body parts and clothing.
This is historically a huge stumbling block for English speakers.
It really is. In English, we are incredibly, almost aggressively possessive.
Mhm.
We claim fierce ownership over everything attached to us.
We put my or his on everything.
Yes. I washed my hands, he opened his eyes, she put on her coat. Every single time we use a possessive pronoun. But Spanish completely abandons the possessive pronoun in these scenarios.
It just uses the definite article, the.
Exactly. So instead of I wash my hands, the source notes that Spanish says me lavo las manos, translated literally. That's I wash myself the hands.
Right.
Or él abrió los ojos. Literally, he opened the eyes. Now, I have to push back here on behalf of every English speaker.
Okay, let's hear it.
Isn't that deeply confusing? If someone just says, he opened the eyes, how on earth do you know whose eyes they are? Could they be someone else's eyes in a jar?
It's a fair question, and honestly, it highlights how unnecessarily redundant English actually is when you stop to think about it.
Redundant. How so?
The Spanish perspective relies entirely on the context of the verb. If you look at the phrase "me lavo las manos," at the beginning, the reflexive pronoun meaning to myself already clearly establishes who is receiving the action.
Okay, I follow that.
If I am the one washing myself, and the objects currently being washed are hands, it is overwhelmingly logically obvious that they are my own hands. Why would I need to spend extra breath specifying that they are my hands?
Whose else would they realistically be?
Exactly.
Okay, that is extremely fair. I wash myself. The hands absolutely gets the job done without being overly grabby about owning the hands.
Linguists call it inalienable possession because these things, your body parts, are intrinsically biologically attached to you. They're inalienable. You don't possess them in the same temporary way you possess a car or a book.
Or a laptop.
Right. They're simply part of your being. So Spanish treats them as such. By intentionally dropping the possessive my or his and just using the language acknowledges that the body part is simply a given fact of the person performing the action.
That's a beautiful way to look at it.
In fact, using a possessive pronoun in Spanish, like saying mis manos in that context, almost sounds strangely clinical, as if you detach your hands at night and keep them in a bedside drawer.
Hold on, give me a second. Let me go get my hands.
Exactly.
I love that imagery. It really is a totally different way of physically moving through the world. Okay, so we've established that definite articles, the el, la, los, las, are used to bound up broad concepts, map specific items, and even refer to our own bodies. But how do we introduce the completely unknown into a conversation? What do we use for the unspecific?
That leads us right to the indefinite articles, the words un, una, unos, and unas.
Which correlate directly to a and some in English.
Right. Their basic everyday job is introducing the unknown. They bring a brand new, unspecific element into the mix.
The text gives the example, compré un libro, which translates to, yesterday I bought a book. At that moment, you, the listener, don't know which specific book I'm talking about yet.
It's just a random book out in the wild.
Right.
And just to briefly tie it back to our earlier point about shock absorbers, that phonetic rule, the cacophonia, applies here too.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So if you want to say an eagle, the text confirms it's un águila, using the masculine un to avoid that double A sound. instead of the feminine una águila. Or the phrase un hambre terrible for a terrible hunger.
Right, the auditory disguises are still fully in place. But reading through this section of the source, I was even more surprised by what happens when you make these articles plural.
It is a neat trick.
The text highlights an incredibly cool function of the plural indefinite articles unos and unas. When you pair them with numbers, they suddenly perform mathematical magic.
Yeah.
They don't just mean some anymore. They turn into about or approximately.
Yes, the approximative value. It's a very elegant, efficient tool in Spanish. Instead of needing to pull a separate, clunky vocabulary word for approximately or roughly, you just use the indefinite article to soften the number.
It's so smooth.
The source gives a perfect, everyday example. El viaje dura unas 3 horas. Literally, translated word for word, that is, the trip takes some 3 hours. But the actual meaning, the way it's understood, is the trip takes about 3 hours.
Or if I want to say I have around $20 in my wallet, I'd say, tengo unos $20.
Exactly.
It is so efficient. The article itself creates a little cushion of estimation, but that's not its only hidden talent. What I found even more fascinating is what the text calls the noun converter.
Ah, the valor sustantivador, the nounifying value. This is a brilliant structural feature of the language.
How does it work?
Well, in English, if you want to turn a descriptive adjective into a person or a tangible thing, you almost always have to add an extra word to prop it up. If someone is acting silly, you can't just point at them and call them a silly.
Yeah, he is a silly sounds exactly like something a toddler would say on the playground.
Precisely. It sounds incomplete. But in Spanish, the indefinite article has the unique power to instantly elevate a mere adjective to full noun status.
That's amazing.
If you take the adjective tonto, which means silly or foolish, and you simply put un in front of it, it completely transforms. The phrase es un tonto translates to he is a fool. The article acts as a converter. It takes a fleeting descriptive word and crystallizes it into an entire solid identity.
It's like a corporate promotion. Congratulations, adjective. You are now a fully functioning noun, complete with a corner office.
That's a great way to put it.
It really shows how heavy these tiny words are. They are doing an incredible amount of heavy lifting behind the scenes. So we've mapped out words for the specific, the general, the unknown, and the approximate.
Right.
But wait, what about when you use absolutely nothing?
Yeah?
In English, we drop articles all the time without a second thought. I like coffee. Cats are cute. He wants money. There are no articles anywhere in those sentences.
True.
So what does this all mean for Spanish? Because, as the source points out, Spanish is incredibly strict about the void. Nouns used with 0 articles.
Yes, navigating the world of bare nouns or nombres escuetos. It is a very highly regulated space. The easiest way to understand the text's breakdown is to divide it into the easy rule and the hard rule.
Okay, let's start with the easy rule.
The easy rule applies to plural nouns. Plural nouns can fairly easily be left bare, particularly when they act as the object receiving the action of a sentence.
Okay.
So the phrase quiero comprar libros, meaning I want to buy books, is perfectly fine. The plural noun can safely float there without an article holding its hand.
But the hard rule is for singular countable nouns. Things you can physically point to and count, like a single car or a dog or a house.
Right.
Spanish generally forbids singular countable nouns from being bare objects. You cannot look at a car lot and say, quiero comprar coche for I want to buy car.
No, absolutely not.
You must anchor it. You must say, quiero comprar un coche, I want to buy a car.
Exactly. A singular countable noun floating in a sentence without an article feels profoundly unstable in Spanish grammar. It needs an anchor to make sense.
But, and there is always a but in grammar rules.
Oh, always.
The source outlines these fascinating exceptions where you can actually drop the article with a singular noun. It's all about verbal compatibilities.
Right. Certain verbs.
Certain verbs give you a VIP pass. Verbs of consumption, creation, or possession, like tener, to have, comprar, to buy, buscar, to look for, or comer, to eat. The analogy I thought of when reading this, it's like talking about a status rather than a physical object. Like if I'm reading the source right, asking about a car with one of these verbs could mean asking if you're a car owner, rather than pointing at a physical car.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it. When you use those specific verbs with a bare singular noun, you are no longer talking about a specific physical object.
It's more abstract.
Exactly. When the text gives the example, tienes coche, literally, do you have car? You aren't asking them to point to a specific metal box in the driveway. You are asking about their life status. Are you a car owner?
That makes total sense.
The force validates this with a few other great examples. The phrase ella busca trabajo means she is looking for work. She isn't looking for one specific predetermined job at a specific desk. She is in the state of job hunting.
Right.
She is pursuing the overarching concept of employment.
Or the example comimos pizza for we ate pizza. You are focused on the consumption of the category of food known as pizza, not a specific pie.
Exactly. In these highly compatible verb scenarios, the bare noun works perfectly to describe a status, a habit, or a general action.
So what does this all mean for the places where the void is strictly forbidden? Just when you think you've figured out when to drop the article, the source hits us with the absolute bans.
The incompatible zones.
Right, the zones where a bare noun will just crash the sentence.
This raises an important question. Where can you never, ever drop the article? First and foremost, as a subject. A bare noun can almost never sit at the steering wheel of a sentence as the subject in Spanish.
Right, because in English, I can easily say, coffee is delicious. The word coffee is right at the front, totally bare.
But in Spanish, that is an absolute structural crash. You cannot say, café es delicioso. It feels profoundly incomplete, as if a vital piece of the architectural foundation is missing.
So you have to say el café.
Yes. You must say, el café es delicioso. It desperately needs that definite article to properly introduce it as the subject of the sentence.
And the other absolute ban ties perfectly back to what we talked about earlier. Verbs of emotion and preference.
Yes.
So words like gustar, to like odiar, to hate, or preferi, to prefer. The text makes it clear these verbs demand the article.
Because when you passionately hate or love something, you are by definition talking about the concept as a whole. Which brings us right back to the generic value we discussed earlier.
Right.
If you hate winter, you don't just hate one specific winter from 3 years ago. You hate the entire concept of the season.
So you can't just say odio invierno. You have to say odio el infierno. I hate the winter.
Exactly.
You have to put that conceptual fence around the whole season and then formally declare your hatred for it. It's so dramatic. I love it.
It really is an elegant closed-loop system. The rules of when to use the article and when to drop it aren't just arbitrary lists to memorize for a quiz. They reflect a deeply consistent philosophical worldview of how abstract concepts, physical objects, and personal actions interact.
Which is exactly what this deep dive has been all about. We've gone from looking at these tiny invisible words as simple grammar tools to seeing them as the architects of a whole different reality.
That's true.
We navigated the mental gymnastics of the custom-tailored gender suits. We learned how Spanish gracefully dodges phonetic crashes with the cacophonia shock absorbers.
Yep.
We saw how indefinite articles can magically estimate math and transform simple adjectives into full-blown nouns. And finally, we survived the void learning, the incredibly strict, status-driven rules of when to use absolutely nothing.
It's a lot to process, especially if you are entirely used to the English way of doing things.
Oh, for sure.
In fact, the source material poses a really fascinating final question for the reader, which I want to pose to you now. Does the concept of using the for general things, like saying me gusta el chocolate instead of just I like chocolate, does that still feel weird to you?
That's a good question.
Or have you started getting used to adding it where English leaves it out?
It's such a great question to reflect on, and it makes me want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to mull over today as you go about your business.
Absolutely.
Think about how deeply our native grammar secretly wires our own brains. If English allows us to fiercely possess our body parts with words like my and drop articles so broad concepts float vaguely in the air,
Right.
while Spanish demands a definite article to solidify those abstract concepts and drops the possessive to show that our bodies are just naturally part of us, how much of our actual perception of reality, of ownership, of what is tangible and what is abstract is secretly being carpeted by these tiny, invisible words we use every single day?
It's a profound thought. The words we don't think about might be doing the most thinking for us.
Exactly. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the invisible rules of the words you use every day, and we'll see you next time.